Rivera 1958, at a party filled with the elite of society, a young man is fully dressed in a suit and holds a glass of champagne. His name is Georges. He observes the crowd, smiling as he takes it all in. He considers getting a third glass of drink when a well-dressed woman, accompanied by two men, one of whom is her husband, calls his attention to their discussion. She asks him what he does for a living, noting that he looks quite young for a gathering of elite businessmen. This question catches him off guard as he is an uninvited guest who only came for some free drink and food. But he quickly responds that he manufactures harpoons used for killing flies. The woman is surprised by this answer. Georges goes on to explain that his harpoons are very sophisticated and they help his home country, which has a problem with flies. The group asks Georges where he is from, and he replies that he is from Romania. He then heads to the bar and continues to regale the guests with manufactured stories, leaving them mesmerized. As he notices more attention is on him, he ascends the stairs, hoping to make a quick escape. He collides with the guest, spilling their drink. The guest demands that he leaves immediately. However, his attention is soon drawn to a captivating sight, an elegantly dressed young woman dancing. Mesmerized, he cannot take his eyes off her. The guest he bumped into whispers in his ear, warning him to discard any ideas he may have about the lady. He reveals that he invited her, but she acts as though he doesn't exist. He disregards the fat man and walks towards the lady, trusting his charms to captivate her. He hands her a glass of champagne. She takes a sip and smiles at him as he proceeds to ask for her name. She tells him to name her as he pleases. He calls her Antoinette, which she loves. She also comments that she has a painting that features a man with the same unique hairdo as his. Without another thought, he smashes his glass on the floor. She smiles and does the same, and they both begin to dance, as he praises her beauty. Soon a small crowd gathers around them. The people soon realize he has been telling them different versions of stories. They now know he is a crook who came uninvited to the party. They begin to call security to apprehend him. To divert attention from the guests at the party, the lady he had charmed with his personality jumps into the river. Seeing this, he breaks free from their hold and jumps into the same river, and he begins to swim towards the lady, extolling her courage. They both decide to leave the river and dash to the park where his car is parked. As soon as they jump out from the river, they get into his car and drive out at high speed. The lady, whose real name is Camille, admits in the car that she believes all the tales he has recounted. He tells her he truly lied about who he is, that he is a car salesman and a crook. She doesn't seem to care about this revelation or who he truly is. She's instead intrigued by him. She begins to tell stories that don't make any sense to him. Standing in the open roof car, she spreads her arms out and screams her lungs out in excitement and asks him to drive faster, lest their lies catch up with them. The breeze caresses her face and sways her hair as Georges speeds up. As he goes faster, her dress gets into his eyes, causing him to momentarily lose control of the car until he hits a rock. As they both alight from the car to inspect it for any damage, they notice a church just opposite them. Camille makes a request for them to get married. Georges is interested, so they both go into the church and light candles. They both stand at the altar and each make a vow to another, and kiss. The next morning, Georges wakes up to see the presence of two reverend sisters and sees himself without clothes at the altar. He quickly runs out of the church wearing his clothes. He realizes his wife Camille is nowhere to be found. As he calls out for her, he notices her scarf tied to a nearby tree. He goes in search of her. In this scene, Georges is dressed as a room service attendant and knocks on the door. When the occupant answers the door, it is the fat guest, Charles from the party, who looks surprised to see him. Georges recognizes that Charles is an imposter who claims to be a senator at the party. He enters the room when he spots two beautiful ladies lying on the bed. Charles, dressed in an elegant robe with a cigar in mouth, knows Georges is here because of Camille. He tells him he had a hard time with Camille, to which Georges responds by telling him he is looking for her. Charles reveals he has known Camille as a friend for many years. He knows she is scared of love and commitment because she grew up in abject poverty and found her father hanging in the attic. This made her run from home. He advises Georges to find a normal wife after telling him where she works. Georges laughs at the suggestion and says he will find his wife Camille, which he calls Antoinette. He walks down the street, looking from shop to shop, until he notices her at a flower shop. He goes nearer and can see her through the glass door arguing with her boss. She then picks up a flower and throws it on the floor angrily before walking out. He runs after her and tells her he loves her. She tells him he doesn't know what he's getting into, that she hates routines, is pathologically jealous, and reveals she's never serene, always either happy or sad. He assures her not to worry because he has the same issues. He confesses he's a spendthrift, a disaster, and a compulsive liar. He reveals he's never been in love before except now. She responds that nobody marries who they love. He says yes because they will make it work together, and they would have a son named Gary. Fast forwarding to the future, it is now 9 months later and Georges finds himself at the reception of a maternity hospital, where he can hear his wife's screams from the labor room. Unable to bear the anxiety any longer, he rushes to her side in the labor room to comfort her. Camille is in pain and groans in pain as she tries to push. The nurses encourage her to try harder. After a while, she gives birth to a beautiful baby boy named Gary, and the parents are filled with joy. Years later, in Paris in 1967, Gary is now 7 years old and is being pursued by a group of class bullies who accuse him of writing nonsense. They pin him to the ground, but he retorts that they lack imagination and even reveals that one of the bullies still wets his bed. This makes the other students laugh at the bully. Kamel stays with Georges, a pet bird, and their son Gary in Paris. Life isn't a fairy tale, but they seem happy. They have a pile of unopened letters from unpaid bills in the house which they never worry about. She notices some bruises on Gary's cheeks, but he isn't disclosing how they came about. She devises a means to get information from him. She encourages him to allow his imagination to soar, and he tells her about the earthquake that happened in school during their algebra lessons, and how he saved his classmates. She then asks him to unburden his mind into her eyes as it would make him feel better. He whispers into her ears how he is being bullied in school because of his poetry and wild imagination. This breaks her heart, but she doesn't let him know. A while later, Georges comes back from work and hugs and kisses her and Gary. Camille goes to Gary's school with his pet bird on a leash, and the students gather around it in excitement. As the principal comes out, she notices the small crowd around the bird. Camille walks up to the principal and tells her how Gary is being bullied by his classmate. The principal responds that Gary is always late to class and seems distant. Camille is able to convince her to let him be homeschooled by her, and Gary is excited about this. When Georges hears of this, he isn't in support, but knowing his wife is an unconventional mother, he gives his approval. Georges observes the change of moods in Camille. At first, it's subtle, but he can't ignore it anymore. He has always known her to be a woman of constant mood swings. One moment she's over the moon, the next moment she's crying her eyes out, but she has never been a violent person until now. One of the incidents happened recently. A tax collector comes to the door to remind them that they owe taxes. Georges assures the man that all the money owed will be paid when he makes sales. However, he's informed by the tax collector that the money won't still be enough to cover his debt. He's also informed that his house would be seized and his properties collected. All of a sudden, Camille comes swinging a big umbrella and hits the man repeatedly until she's restrained by Georges. She falls to the ground and begins to cry. They are currently repainting their house to put it up for sale, but Camille's strange behavior continues. During a homeschooling lunch with other parents of homeschooled kids, they are enjoying their meal. However, Georges becomes uncomfortable when he notices that something is off with Camille. She's unusually quiet. When one of the parents makes a joking comment about Gary making a lot of money from selling their house, Camille hears this and suddenly grabs a bottle, slamming it loudly on the table. She also pulls down her leggings and drops them on the table, causing one of the parents to whisper that she may have lost her mind. Gary tries to diffuse the tension by laughing over the embarrassing moment, and the others follow suit. Camille, on the other hand, starts to cry. The room is quiet. Georges goes over to her, bending over. He asks if she needs a nap. He persuades her to follow him inside for a rest. The behavior of Camille appears to be increasingly erratic and unpredictable, which her spouse Georges cannot justify or clarify anymore. Another occurrence in which she undressed and walked into the sitting room in front of a guest, then subsequently went out into the street, is a sign of her dwindling mental health. Georges' attempt to minimize Camille's behavior by attributing it to her wild imagination when Gary asks why she behaves the way she does. Georges is out with his son for a quick dinner. Upon returning home, he notices a small gathering of people at the front of his house. Police officers and an ambulance are present. Without hesitation, Georges pushes himself into the crowd and sees his wife on a stretcher, about to be loaded into the ambulance. She looks relieved upon seeing him and admits to setting the building on fire to prevent the tax collectors from coming. As he draws closer to her, a law enforcement official discloses that his wife made an attempt to set ablaze their residence, but thankfully, there were no injuries, and firefighters were able to promptly extinguish the flames. It is now crystal clear to Georges that he can no longer minimize his wife's illness and the need for help. Meanwhile, their son Gary remains perplexed by the chaotic turn of events. Georges and Gary are present at the hospital where Camille is currently receiving treatment. Gary asks his dad why his mother is under hospital care, to which Georges responds that it's in the best interest of her health and that she is receiving appropriate medical attention. Georges further explains that upon her discharge, Camille will be fully cured, and they will be back as a happy family. However, the duration of her stay remains uncertain, and this news breaks Gary's heart. Georges reassures his son that their mother's mental state will soon improve, and she will be able to join them again. Charles, who is fondly called Rotter by Georges' household, is a close friend and has always been around the family during their good and bad times. He knows Camille to be a woman of mixed moods and he liked her before she got entangled with Georges, but she never reciprocated his feelings, and they existed as brother and sister. Since Camille's hospitalization, Charles has always been around the house. He has lunch or dinner with them, tells Gary stories, and makes them laugh. Charles has become an uncle figure to Gary who always enjoys his presence. Georges and his son make their way to the healthcare facility to see Camille. As they enter her room, they notice her seated in a chair and appearing to be unconscious and immobile. This frightens them, especially Gary, who is almost close to tears. Unexpectedly, she springs up and chuckles, surprising them. Georges reprimands her for this behavior, explaining that it is too much for their son to handle. Camille apologizes and embraces Gary, indicating that she only meant to lighten the atmosphere with her prank. Gary is overwhelmed with fear and begins to cry, while his mother pulls him in a big embrace and comforts him. Camille is looking like she's back to how she was before, a lovely and fun person to be with. A lot is happening at the mental health facility which she cannot share with her family. She does not want them to worry about her age. The facility provides a different treatment to its patients. They try unconventional methods to push the patients towards normalcy. Camille remembers being dragged by 4 health workers into a bathtub filled with ice, being locked in, and forced to lay inside for a couple of hours. Sometimes she is pushed into the bathroom and high-pressured water is poured on her. This treatment is doing more harm than good, and it is progressively eroding what is left of her sanity. When she has had enough of the constant torture, she decides to look for a way out. Unfortunately, she is apprehended when she picks up a broken bottle to... She is overpowered and restrained. This physical treatment is taking a toll on her mental health. As Georges goes back to visit his wife, he notices she has deteriorated from the last time he saw her. She looks beaten and downtrodden both mentally and physically. He does not want Gary to see his mom in such a state, so he asks him to go play outside. He goes over and lays in her bed, his heart heavy. He apologizes to his wife for the part he has played to put her in this state, for the mails he has left unopened, the tax he has evaded, and for not trying to protect her more from the beginning. In his embrace, she responds that she loves him from the beginning because he didn't try to protect her. He wanted her to be her original self. Camille expresses her discontent about being hospitalized, claiming that the experience worsens her condition. She wants to be home with her family, exploring the world. She expresses a desire to leave, but is unsure whether the facility would allow her to do so. He sympathizes with Camille and promises to help her escape. He and Gary plan the operation, and they work together to devise a strategy. Georges serves Gary a drink, which despite causing some discomfort, he still enjoys. Under the cover of darkness, Gary scales the fence to gain entry to Camille's room, and the trio successfully reunites. They stage the scene to make it appear as though Camille has been abducted. After breaking out, they all are able to leave the facility undetected by staff. As they enter the vehicle, Camille comments that the vehicle will draw attention to them as she will soon be regarded as a missing person and put on state alert. Georges responds that they have the perfect disguise. He brings out the costume of the pilot, which he and his son wear to avoid suspicion from the public. Georges informs the wife that with the help of Charles, they are able to get new passports and identities. They are all moving to Valencia. Camille is overjoyed by the news. She then asks after their pet bird. Gary informs her that Charles has traveled with it and is waiting for them. Soon they arrive at their new apartment, which they are all pleased with. This is made possible by Charles. Georges thanks Charles for all the sacrifices he has made for them, and Charles responds that Georges has given him a family. In this scene, father and son are having lunch with their pet bird on the table, eating from a can of pet food. They are happy, giggling, and taking in the scenery when Camille comes to the table and tells them Charles forgot his bird. They are surprised as the bird is owned by the family, and Camille especially loves it. She says she doesn't want the bird around, and Georges responds that the bird is harmless. Camille hears this and goes into a fit of rage, using her towel to hit the bird, which makes Gary cry. Camille is shouting and saying the bird is looking at her and judging her, telling her that she isn't good enough. Georges stands to hug her, but she pushes him away as she walks inside. Gary walks out feeling bad about his mom's attitude toward the poor bird, and his father walks after him. Camille is still seething from rage. She goes to the closet, picks up a gun, and aims at the bird from the window, intending to kill it. Gary and his dad are standing by it. As she shoots, the bird flies away. Gary begins to wail and cry for his pet bird to come back. Camille immediately comes to her senses, realizing what she has done, and begins to cry too. Her husband goes to console her. At night of the same day, Camille paces back and forth, turning to look at George as she says there's a war happening and they shouldn't let the enemy win. Gary listens to his mother chatter but cannot deduce the point she is trying to pass across. The next day, Georges observes Camille and comes to the painful realization that her active imagination is gradually clouding her reality. He knows she may deteriorate to a point where she may not be able to differentiate what is real and what is in her vivid mind. The thought scares him. He decides to prepare the room where she will be locked in if things get out of hand. A while later, he is with Gary and they are both alarmed to see Camille hitting the wall and screaming. He knows what to do. He has to restrain her till she becomes stable. He begins to drag her into the room as she talks and screams, putting her inside and locks the door. His heart breaks when he hears her calling for him and trying to open the door. Georges unlocks the door where he had confined Camille after he notices her maniac episodes have subsided. The following day, they host a community party, and both Camille and Georges dress exquisitely. They dance passionately while gazing into each other's eyes. The party concludes when they notice Gary dozing off outside. Camille lifts him up and places him in his bed. He awakens and inquires whether his pet bird will ever return home. She informs him that the bird never departed. It will forever reside in his heart. She explains that the bird is meant to soar over oceans and mountains and behold all the wonders of the world. She also assures him that she will never let her manic episodes come between them. She's proud to have a son like him. These words and pledges from his mother soothe his soul. He soon falls asleep. In the morning, Georges sits on the balcony, enjoying his breakfast and basking in the morning sunshine. Gary joins him and takes a slice of bread. Suddenly, his attention is drawn to something in the river. He strains his eyes and looks closer. It's his Camille body, floating in the water, and he's stricken with panic as he rushes towards the river. He calls out her name. Gary is terrified, watching his mother's lifeless form floating in the river. His father dashes towards the water, frantically swimming towards the body. He pulls her onto the shore and starts performing chest compressions. His screams fill the air as he realizes she isn't responding. Gary rests his head on his mother's chest and weeps silently. The following day, Georges, Gary, and Charles are attending her burial. As the priest delivers the eulogy, Camille appears, removing his wig to reveal his bald head. They all burst into laughter. At night, they set up firecrackers to celebrate Camille. As the last one explodes, Georges feels a sense of sadness as he realizes he'll never see her again. The following morning, Gary wakes up to find Charles smoking in the living room. He tells Gary that his father has left to search for his wife, leaving them behind. Gary inquires about how children manage to survive without their parents. Just then, his pet bird flies in, which he sees as a sign of love from his parents.